Star Trek, Primitive Passenger Season 5, Episode 3, Cassette. The holographic display cast a spectral blue glow across Nolan Mercer's face as he flipped through tactical schematics with practiced precision. His weathered fingers hammered away the three-dimensional projections floating before him, each touch triggering new layers of information to unfurl in the air. The quiet hum of the havoc systems provided a soothing backdrop to his concentration, until an insistent buzzing erupted from behind his right ear. "Not now," Nolan muttered, his focus momentarily fractured. He tapped irritably at the spot where his translation matrix was implanted, just behind his right ear. The buzzing subsided for a moment, then resumed with greater intensity, like an impatient child demanding attention. The soft padding of footsteps announced Ilara's arrival before she spoke. She walked in from the cargo hold, her expression curious as she observed Nolan's discomfort. "Is he bugging you again?" she asked, leaning against the bulkhead with her arms folded. Her holographic form had become so natural over the years that one could easily forget she had once been merely a ship's AI, just a few short centuries ago. Nolan glanced up, massaging the tender spot behind his ear. "What do you mean, again?" "The Maldor." Ilara's eyes followed his movements. "He hasn't talked to me in ages, but I do pick up a lot of his chatter." Nolan's hand froze mid-motion. "Chatter? You mean it's sending signals to someone other than me?" Ilara shrugged, the gesture surprisingly human. "Hard to say. We're using different languages. I can only understand when you transmit codes for him." Her grin widened. "Why, you jealous? Sometimes it's like having an extra crew member or a kid running around that I periodically forget about." Nolan spun his chair to face her. That lit up Ilara's face. "Who knows? You could have lots of kids running around, or at least descendants of kids." She teased. "Some of them might have tails." Ilara doubled over, laughing. "I lived through a year's worth of stress, terror, and hilarity in a matter of days. I think about that station all the time." He shook his head as the nostalgia washed over him. "And came home with your little buddy out there." Ilara leaned her head toward the hold. The revelation hung in the air between them, another mystery in a long line of uncertainties about the alien vessel that had become an unexpected ally. Hours later, Nolan hunched over a sparse meal in his quarters, pushing protein cubes around his plate with minimal enthusiasm. The food was nutritionally perfect, but utterly devoid of character, much like many of the relationships he'd formed over his centuries of existence. The thought brought a wry smile to his lips, just as the buzzing behind his ear erupted again, louder and more insistent than before. The sound crescendoed into an uncomfortable whine that seemed to reverberate through his skull. Nolan flung his utensil down with a clatter. "Geez, all right," he growled, abandoning his dinner and rising to his feet in one fluid motion. The persistent call had become impossible to ignore, pulling him like an invisible tether toward the cargo hold. The corridors of the havoc stretched before him, their familiar contours, a stark contrast to the alien presence beckoning him forward. His boots echoed against the deck plating, each step bringing him closer to the source of the summons. As Nolan approached the Maldor in its usual docking spot closest to the bridge, the small vessel's systems began to power up. Lights flickered to life across its flat, worn surface. The hull rattled with energy, vibrations traveling through the deck and up Nolan's legs. "You're in a hurry," Nolan mumbled, eyeing the ship with a mixture of fascination and wariness. The Maldor had never fired up on its own before, at least not so blatantly. Normally, Nolan had to tell it what to do, or at least thought he did. The relationship between man and vessel had always existed in a gray area of consciousness, a dance of subtle impulses and subconscious commands. The Maldor often planted suggestions in Nolan's mind without his full awareness. Navigation coordinates that seemed to come from nowhere, system adjustments that his fingers made automatically. He would enter codes, make course corrections, and guide the ship while never quite realizing he was following the Maldor's silent directives. It made the vessel impossible to steal. Without this unique communion, it would simply kill anyone inside who didn't respond to its commands, usually by unceremoniously venting its interior to space. The entrance hatch popped open with a clunk, and Nolan lifted it above his head, revealing the cockpit's interior, illuminated by the soft glow of control panels coming to life. The single seat seemed to beckon him, an invitation he couldn't refuse. Nolan jumped into the cockpit with the ease of long familiarity. His hands moved across the controls without conscious thought, entering the complex sequence to prepare to blink out of the havoc. The display before him calculated trajectories and power distributions, preparing to tear a hole in the fabric of space. Through the viewports, the angular confines of the Havoc's cargo bay framed his vision, soon to be replaced by the limitless expanse of space. Whatever the Maldor wanted to show him, it clearly couldn't wait. With a sudden flash of brilliance, the little ship vanished from the Havoc's hold, leaving behind nothing but empty space and unanswered questions. The elongated stars snapped into place, and Nolan's vision cleared to reveal stars in unfamiliar configurations. His practiced eye scanned the viewport, recognition failing to materialize. "What the hell?" he muttered, checking the navigational display. The coordinates were meaningless, nothing he recognized from any chart in his extensive database. They weren't just outside the Havoc as he'd planned. They were somewhere else entirely, somewhere unknown. The rusted Maldor cruiser shuddered beneath him, its flat, worn exterior reflecting dull pinpoints of starlight. The rectangular vessel shifted side to side like a predator testing its prey, then suddenly launched forward at maximum impulse. The acceleration pressed Nolan back into his seat as the ship hurtled toward a massive moon orbiting a colossal red and orange gas giant that dominated the view screen. "Where the hell are we, buddy?" Nolan mumbled, his fingers dancing across the control panel. A strange sensation rippled through his mind. Not quite a sound, not quite a thought. Cassette. Nolan frowned, tapping the spot behind his ear where his translator was implanted. "Did you just say that to me? Is that where we are? Sid?" He tapped the comm panel, but only static answered his call. He double-tapped the emergency frequency. "Hey, Lara, can you hear me?" Nothing but cold silence responded. The moon grew larger in the viewport, its crater-scarred surface now racing beneath them. Nolan gripped the manual controls, attempting to take command of their trajectory, but his efforts met with nothing but an insistent buzz in his ear. The Maldor remained steadfastly under its own control. "Okay, you got the wheel," Nolan conceded, raising his hands in surrender. "Just don't kill me or nothing, okay?" Again that strange concept. Cassette rattled through his consciousness, neither word nor image, but somehow both. The Maldor cruiser banked sharply, following the moon's curvature. As they rounded the horizon, Nolan's breath caught in his throat. A leviathan hung in space before them, a vessel so immense it defied comprehension. Much of its hull matched the Maldor's faded rust color, but patches of weathered teal and sections of dark, almost black-green created a patchwork pattern across its surface. The ship was essentially a massive rectangle, like the Maldor, but exponentially larger. Nolan owned moons smaller than this behemoth. It had to be 10 times the size of the Havoc. "My God," Nolan whispered, his centuries of space travel suddenly insufficient preparation for the sight before him. The Maldor cruiser approached the titanic vessel's surface, flying over what resembled a vast mechanical city. Up close, the patchwork became more distinct, countless rectangular sections in various states of repair, with protruding antennas, sensor arrays, weapon ports, and unknown appendages breaking up the monotony of the hull. Now, even closer, Nolan could see additional colors interspersed among the dominant rust, teal and dark green patches of faded yellow, strips of dull silver, and sections of weathered bronze, as though the vessel had been assembled from countless smaller ships over an unimaginable time span. The Maldor decelerated as they approached a specific section of the hull. Nolan leaned forward, squinting at what appeared to be an opening. A perfect rectangle, precisely sized to accommodate the Maldor cruiser. Understanding dawned suddenly, clear as a star-going nova. "Cassette," Nolan said aloud, the word strange on his tongue yet somehow right. "This is your IOU. This is your ship." The Maldor cruiser aligned itself with the rectangular opening, a key seeking its lock. It slotted in nose first with mechanical precision, ending with a solid ka-chunkt that reverberated through the hull. Home. The Maldor had brought itself home, with Nolan along for the ride. The moment the Maldor cruiser settled into its receptacle, a symphony of mechanical sounds erupted around Nolan. Massive locking mechanisms engaged with resonant clack-clack chunks, each impact reverberating through the small vessel's hull. Hydraulic pistons extended with serpentine hisses, securing the Maldor in place like a component slotting into an ancient machine. Pressure seals formed with whooshing gasps, followed by the metallic tinkle of umbilical connectors finding their ports. The cockpit vibrated as power conduits engaged, and Nolan felt the familiar hum of the Maldor change pitch as it interfaced with the greater vessel. The view screen flickered, then began cycling through a dizzying array of visuals. Interior corridors where emergency lights blinked to life after untold years of darkness. Vast chambers with ceiling heights that disappeared into shadow. Exterior hull sections where maintenance drones stirred from dormancy. With each new image, information flooded Nolan's mind, not as words or data, but as instinctive knowledge, as though he'd always known these spaces. Ancient reactor cores deep within the Leviathan's bowels began their warm-up sequences, coils glowing a dull orange as they heated for the first time in decades, perhaps centuries. Coolant systems gurgled to life, pushing long stagnant fluids through miles of conduits. A low, mournful groan echoed through the vessel, the sound of a slumbering giant reluctantly awakening. The noise came not from any single system, but from the collective protest of countless components answering the call to action. Bulkheads expanded as they heated, deck plates settled under renewed gravity, and support struts adjusted to new stresses with creaks that seemed almost organic in their expressiveness. The cacophony organized itself into patterns, hisses, thrums, and whines, establishing rhythms that spoke of purposes Nolan could feel, but not yet name. His translator implant buzzed incessantly, attempting to process the flood of alien concepts pouring into his consciousness. Almost unconsciously, Nolan's fingers danced across the Maldor's controls, inputting sequences of numbers and commands he couldn't recall learning. The little cruiser, now fused with its parent vessel, translated his inputs to the greater whole. More lights activated across the massive ship, propulsion systems stirred from their long dormancy, and navigation arrays quivered as they sensed the void around them. With another long, shuddering groan like continental plates shifting after an eon of stillness, the Leviathan began to move. Nolan felt the faint push of acceleration, infinitesimal given the vessel's mass, yet unmistakable. The stars in the viewport shifted almost imperceptibly as the enormous rectangular ship ground forward. Nolan's mind raced with possibilities even as his hands continued their autonomous work. Was this a warship from some forgotten civilization? A generation vessel designed to travel between galaxies? Could it house an armada that would make the Havoc's drone fleet seem paltry by comparison? Would Ilara be able to harness the blink drive to transport something of this magnitude? His speculation was interrupted by increasing bombardment of information streaming through his translator implant. System diagnostics, structural integrity reports, navigational data. It flowed into his consciousness faster than he could process, threatening to overwhelm him. Power distribution networks spanning thousands of kilometers of internal space revealed themselves in his mind's eye. Weapons systems of unfathomable design lay dormant, awaiting commands he didn't yet know how to give. The Maldor now, merely a control node for the Colossus, continued feeding him information, layer after layer of complexity unveiling itself like an endless mechanical onion. Nolan struggled to maintain his sense of self against the tide of alien knowledge, even as his hands continued guiding the massive vessel toward some unknown destination. He had wanted adventure throughout his centuries of life, had seen wonders and terrors across multiple quadrants of space. But now, plugged into the nervous system of this titanic ship, Nolan Mercer wondered if he had finally found something that might be beyond even his considerable abilities to control. The stream of information intensified, countless data points flooding Nolan's consciousness like a tidal wave crashing against the shores of his mind. System diagnostics, power allocations, life support metrics. The deluge was relentless. His translator implant burned hot against his skin, struggling to process the alien architecture of the data. "Too much," Nolan gasped, clutching the sides of his head. "Slow down, damn it." The neural interface paid no heed to his protests. His vision blurred, fragmented, and finally darkened as unconsciousness claimed him, a merciful reprieve from the overwhelming storm of information. Nolan awoke to darkness and the distant, rhythmic pulse of machinery. He lay on a cold, metal floor, the taste of copper in his mouth. Gradually, emergency lighting strips along the floor activated in response to his movement, casting a soft, amber glow that stretched down a corridor in both directions. "Olara," he called out instinctively, his voice echoing through the empty passageway. No answer came. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the throbbing pain behind his right ear. The translator implant felt unnaturally warm, but at least the maddening buzz had subsided to a tolerable hum. The corridor extended further than the emergency lighting revealed, disappearing into darkness in both directions. The walls bore inscriptions in a script Nolan didn't recognize, angular symbols arranged in precise patterns. His translator offered no insight. Whatever language this was, it predated his technology by millennia. "Where'd you take me, you rust bucket?" Nolan muttered, picking a direction at random. Each footstep echoed through the cavernous space, a stark reminder of how alone he was in this mechanical behemoth. After several minutes of walking, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. As Nolan entered, proximity sensors activated more substantial lighting, illuminating a space that stretched hundreds of meters in every direction. Row after row of cylindrical structures filled the chamber, each roughly the size of a human body. "Stasis pods," Nolan breathed, approaching the nearest one. A layer of frost obscured the transparent panel on the front of the pod, but Nolan could make out a vague humanoid shape within. He wiped away the condensation with his sleeve, revealing the occupant. The being inside appeared vaguely humanoid, but clearly alien, taller and more slender than a human, with skin the color of burnished copper. Its features were angular and symmetrical, with multiple sets of closed eyelids. A network of fine, almost metallic fibers replaced what would have been hair on a human. Nolan moved to the next pod, and the next, finding similar beings in each. Some variations existed between individuals, slight differences in height, build, and the patterns of the metallic fibers, but they were clearly of the same species. "A colony ship," Nolan whispered, the realization dawning on him as he surveyed the thousands of pods extending into the distance. He continued his exploration, finding more stasis chambers, each holding hundreds more pods connected by arterial corridors that branched throughout the vessel's interior. In one chamber, smaller pods contained what appeared to be juveniles of the species. In another, elaborate containers housed samples of plant life, seeds, and other biological materials. Eventually, Nolan found his way to what could only be described as a control center, a circular chamber with a raised platform in its center. As he stepped onto the platform, holographic displays flickered to life around him, showing status reports and navigational data in the same alien script he'd seen throughout the ship. Beneath the displays, a three-dimensional representation of a planetary system appeared, the gas giant and its massive moon they had approached. Highlighted areas on the moon's surface pulsed with gentle light, drawing his attention to specific regions. The translator implant behind his ear warmed again, But this time the information came in manageable pieces, concepts rather than raw data. Terraform, colonize, revitalize. That's what you're built for, Nolan said, understanding washing over him. You're not a warship, you're an ark. He studied the holographic display more carefully. The moon's current state, barren and hostile, was shown alongside projections of what it could become: oceans, continents, an atmosphere capable of supporting the sleeping passengers. The ship had been designed to transform the moon into a habitable world, but something had gone wrong. Perhaps the navigation system had failed, or the original crew had died before reaching their destination. Whatever the cause, the great vessel had drifted for eons, its purpose unfulfilled, its passengers suspended in dreamless sleep. Yet despite the passage of time, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, the ship's systems remained functional. The stasis pods still maintained their precious cargo. The terraforming equipment, while dormant, appeared intact. Nolan's hands moved across the control interface, guided by intuition and the gentle nudges from his translator implant. Diagnostic reports confirmed his suspicions. The great ship could still fulfill its purpose. The process would take centuries: atmospheric conversion, seeding of basic organisms, gradual building of ecosystems. But it could be done. His fingers hesitated over the final command sequence. Starting this process would commit the ship to centuries of work. The passengers would sleep on, unaware, as their new home was crafted molecule by molecule from the barren rot below. "What do you say, Cassette?" Nolan asked the empty air. "Ready to finish your mission?" The ship's systems hummed in response, a subtle change in tone that seemed almost eager. The Maldor cruiser had brought him here for this moment, to be the hand that restarted this ancient journey. With a deep breath, Nolan completed the sequence. Throughout the massive vessel, long-dormant systems roared to life. In the distance, he heard the grinding of enormous mechanisms as terraforming equipment prepared for deployment. The holographic display showed the first unmanned probes launching toward the moon's surface, beginning the painstaking process of analysis and preparation. Nolan stepped back from the control platform, a strange mix of emotions washing over him. He had just initiated a process that would outlive him, even with his extended lifespan. A project spanning centuries that would culminate in the rebirth of a civilization he would never know. "Not bad for a day's work," he murmured, a tired smile crossing his face. "Now, how the hell do I get back to the Havoc?" Nolan stepped back from the control platform, the weight of what he'd just initiated settling across his shoulders. All around him, the ancient vessel hummed with renewed purpose, machinery grinding to life after millennia of dormancy. The holographic displays showed the first unmanned probes already launching toward the moon's surface. "Not bad for a day's work," he murmured, the tired smile crossing his face. "Now, how the hell do I get back to the Havoc?" The question had barely left his lips when the translator implant behind his ear warned. Not the painful buzz from before, but a gentle sensation, almost comforting. A simple concept formed in his mind: departure. The floor beneath Nolan's feet illuminated with a soft amber glow, a pathway leading away from the control center. Having learned to trust these settled guidances, he followed the trail through corridors he hadn't yet explored. The amber path twisted through the Leviathan's interior, bypassing more stasis chambers, and what appeared to be laboratories filled with exotic equipment. After several minutes of walking, Nolan arrived at a small chamber he would have missed entirely without the guiding lights. Unlike the rest of the ship's angular utilitarian design, this room was curved, almost organic in its contours. At its center sat a pod perhaps 3 meters long and 2 meters wide, gleaming with a polished finish that contrasted sharply with the weathered surfaces throughout the rest of the vessel. "Escape pod," Nolan ventured, circling the small craft. It had no visible controls, no apparent entrance. Just as he was about to voice his confusion, a seam appeared along the pod's upper surface. The material parted silently, revealing a cramped interior with a single reclined seat molded into its floor. The translator implant warmed again. Safety. Return. You're sending me home, Nolan realized. Thanks. It's been educational. He climbed into the pod, folding his frame into the seat that seemed designed for the ship's slender occupants. The moment he settled in, the seam above him sealed, plunging him into darkness for a brief moment before soft lighting activated around the pod's interior. A panel illuminated before him, displaying symbols he didn't recognize, nothing like the script he'd seen throughout the rest of the ship. These were more fluid, almost like musical notation, arranged in swirling patterns that somehow conveyed meaning despite their unfamiliarity. The implant behind his ear hummed, and Nolan's hand moved to the panel without conscious thought. His fingers traced patterns across the alien interface, entering coordinates he couldn't possibly know yet somehow understood completely. Where am I telling it to go? He wondered aloud. The answer came not in words, but in certainty. He was programming the Havoc's coordinates, instructing the pod to return him to his ship. The last symbol entered. Nolan felt a subtle shift beneath him as the pod disengaged from its housing. A viewport appeared in what had previously been a solid wall of the pod, allowing him to watch as the small craft detached from the Leviathan and moved away from its massive hull. Through the viewport, he could see the enormous vessel growing smaller as the pod gained distance, the moon and gas giant framing the scene in cosmic grandeur. Nolan expected a conventional propulsion system to engage. Thrusters, impulse engines, something. Instead, the implant behind his ear grew almost uncomfortably warm, and the strange symbols on the control panel pulsed with inner light. Wait, is this thing going to? The question died in his throat as reality bent around the pod. The stars elongated, space itself folded, and for a brief, disorienting moment, Nolan felt his consciousness smeared across light years of emptiness. Then, with shocking abruptness, the universe snapped back into focus. The pod tumbled slowly in open space, its momentum carrying it in a gentle spin. Through the viewport, Nolan could see not stars, not the gas giant, but the familiar interior of the Havoc's cargo bay. Son of A, he breathed, blinking in disbelief. The pod had materialized with pinpoint accuracy directly into the Havoc's hold. How'd you find me, Alara? The pod scene reappeared. The craft opened like a blooming flower, depositing Nolan unceremoniously onto the cargo bay floor. He rolled to his feet just as Alara rushed into the hold, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. Nolan. She hurried to his side, scanning him with her eyes. Are you all right? The Maldor disappeared, and then she paused, staring at the unfamiliar pod. What is that thing? And where have you been? Nolan dusted himself off, glancing back at the alien craft. That's my taxi. As for where I've been... He tapped his translator implant. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me, Alara said, already leading him toward the bridge. And where's the Maldor? That's the interesting part. Nolan followed her through the corridors of the Havoc. The Maldor is part of something much bigger. A ship. No, more like a mobile planet. Makes the Havoc look like a toy. They reached the bridge, and Alara immediately moved to the central console. Show me where, she said, activating the navigational displays. A three-dimensional map of their sector materialized above the console, stars and systems rendered in glowing detail. Nolan stared at the map, then shook his head. It won't be on there. What do you mean? I mean, Nolan said carefully, it's not in this sector. Maybe not even this quadrant. Alara's fingers danced across the controls, expanding the display to show the entire Alpha quadrant, then the Beta, then the Delta. Where, Nolan? The pod, Nolan said, tapping his implant again. It sent coordinates to request a blink. Coordinates I've never seen before. Alara accessed the ship's blink logs, her eyes widening as data scrolled across her display. Without a word, she expanded the galactic map, then made a sweeping outward motion with both arms, like someone opening a book to its center. The display zoomed out drastically, revealing not just their galaxy but nearby ones as well. Nolan's breath caught as Ilara pointed to a spot far removed from the Milky Way. "Here," she said quietly. "This is where I received the blink request from, and where I picked you up from." She looked at him, her expression serious. "Nolan, the Maldor sent you to another galaxy entirely." "Jesus," Nolan whispered, staring at the impossible distance displayed before them. "And the ship, the massive one?" "It's there too," Ilara nodded. The coordinates were precise. "I've never received a blink request from so far before. I didn't even know it was possible." Nolan sank into his command chair, mind reeling. "It's a colony ship, Ilara, full of stasis pods, thousands of them, an entire civilization in suspended animation. And the Maldor is what? Their shuttle?" "More like a key," Nolan said, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "A remote control. It brought me there to help restart their mission, to terraform a moon for their colony. And now the Maldor is staying to complete that mission," Ilara concluded. Nolan nodded, a strange melancholy settling over him. "Looks that way." "So what was the pod?" Ilara asked, studying the logs more carefully. "Emergency transport, I think. The Maldor knew how to call you to blink me back." Nolan gestured to the distant point of light on the display. "Somehow it knew your reach extended that far." Ilara's expression became thoughtful. "It knew a lot more than that, Nolan. The blink coordination between me and that pod was perfect. Like we were designed to work together." They both stared at the galactic display, the immensity of what had just happened sinking in. Their little Maldor cruiser had been part of something far greater than they'd imagined. A link to an ancient civilization crossing between galaxies, a key to unlocking a future that had been suspended in time for thousands, perhaps millions of years. And now it was gone, fulfilling the purpose it had been built for eons ago. Epilogue. 3 days later, Nolan sat in his command chair, scrolling through logistics reports on the Dominion's Ketracel White production facilities. His expression was tight with concentration, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the Maldor and its people in their distant slumber. Ilara burst onto the bridge, moving faster than Nolan had seen her move in decades. "He's back," she exclaimed, breathless with excitement. "I don't believe it." Nolan jumped from his chair, reports forgotten. "What are you talking about?" He hurried after her as she sprinted toward the cargo hold. "Just come see." They raced through the corridors, Nolan's mind spinning with possibilities. As they reached the cargo bay, he skidded to a halt, staring in disbelief. There, in its usual docking spot closest to the bridge, sat the rusted Maldor cruiser. It looked exactly as it always had, worn, utilitarian, somehow both archaic and impossibly advanced. The vessel hummed contentedly, as if it had never left. "What? How?" Nolan approached slowly, reaching out to touch its familiar hull. "The terraforming project, the colony, it would take centuries." The translator implant behind his ear warmed gently, and Ilara burst into laughter. "What?" Nolan demanded, turning toward her. "What's so funny?" Ilara doubled over, tears of mirth forming at the corners of her eyes. He said, she struggled to compose herself. He said, "Terraforming. Slow, slow," Nolan repeated, confusion evident on his face. He'd rather hang out here with his buddy than wait hundreds of years for something to happen. Ilara wiped her eyes, still chuckling. "Basically, he got bored." Nolan stared at the Maldor, then back at Ilara, before a slow smile spread across his face. "You're kidding me." He placed his palm flat against the ship's hull. "You came all the way back across galaxies because you were impatient." The implant warmed again, and this time Nolan felt it too. A sensation that wasn't quite words, wasn't quite emotion, but something uniquely between them, something like affection. "Unbelievable," Nolan murmured, shaking his head. "You launch a multi-century terraforming operation to save your entire species, and then you just clock out early to go joyriding." Ilara composed herself, though her eyes still danced with amusement. To be fair, the process is automated, and the Maldor set up remote monitoring. If anything goes wrong, it can be back there in an instant. So what, we just pick up where we left off? Nolan asked, patting the ship's hull. You planning to stick around for good? The translator implant warmed with what could only be described as contentment. I'll take that as a yes, Nolan said, his own smile broadening. He turned to Alara. Looks like our crew just got a little bigger, permanently. A ship from another galaxy with a fondness for adventures and a distaste for boredom, Alara mused. Sounds like you'll fit right in. The Maldor hummed in what seemed suspiciously like agreement, and for the first time in days Nolan felt the weight of melancholy lift from his shoulders. He might have helped restart an ancient mission of hope for a sleeping civilization, but somehow, against all odds, he hadn't lost his strange little companion in the process. As they left the cargo bay, Nolan felt the translator implant warm one more time with a concept that wasn't quite the word home, but conveyed its meaning perfectly. Yeah, he murmured, glancing back at the Maldor. Welcome home, buddy.